what I wanted to talk about today was some research that was done by by the Checkpoint Research Department. Now, what Checkpoint Research is obviously people know Checkpoint for security vendor, firewalls, and this kind of stuff. But what we have is a completely separate department that goes with. Hold on a second, I just realized I haven't shared my screen, which is rather unfortunate. We have a completely separate department that has absolutely nothing to do with our day-to-day business, doesn't get involved in firewalls or coding or anything like that. They are purely and simply there to try and figure out threats on the internet. So what they've done is everything from figuring out how to break into the site using fax machines, how to hack into your digital cameras. But one of the major things we do is we look at what's out there and we try and identify threat actors. So as they have complete autonomy to go out and do whatever it is that they wish to do, look at whatever they wish to look at, then it gives us the ability to track people down. And that's what I wanted to talk about today. So I wanted to take you through some cyber espionage that we found. This was actually kind of found and rooted out last year, but I still think it's relevant. Now, although this is largely based around the Far East, I think the techniques used and what we can actually get from this is pertinent across the world. Indeed, this attack is actually moving closer and closer as well, as we see as we're kind of moving through. So as it stands at the moment, we're seeing lots and lots of attacks against all sections. So certainly government, political organisations have always been a favourite target, industry, but recently we've seen a lot more against education and healthcare as well. A lot of it due to the COVID-19. If a hospital is really heavily overcrowded, then they're more likely to pay if you've done some ransomware on. So cyber criminals tend to be an opportunistic bunch at the best of times. So that's a really good way that you can actually leverage what you're doing. So we're not actually talking about that today. Today we're going with cyber espionage. Okay, so this is what we're going to talk about. We'll have a chat about the target. We'll look into the infection chain, the infrastructure based around the threat actor. We'll have a look at the tools they're using, how we can attribute to them, and who's behind it. The company we're talking about today, or the threat actor we're talking about today, is Naikon. So we want to look at a couple of the tools they use, how they do it. Some of the I've been in this industry, as was mentioned, quite a long time. Indeed, I did an apprenticeship with Texas Instruments way back. So I've been doing this quite a long time, and sadly, a lot of the tools that are used there actually haven't changed in the interceding years. You know, things have pretty much remained the same. And the first in you get with any kind of threat, you can be as technical as you like, but if it's not for users doing something, clicking on something, downloading something, then you're probably not going to be. It's going to be very difficult to penetrate an organization. And this one is really interesting because we kind of stumbled across this a little bit. We were doing some work for somebody else at another organization, and what we found was a malicious email that was sent from an embassy to a government, and it was that then set us on the trail to figure out to have a look at what we're doing. So what we tried to do with our research was have a look at the threat actors behind it and figure out what they were doing, and we had to track back over a period of time because this group was first came to note with in 2015. So how they've developed and how they've kind of how they've moved on from there. Okay, so let's have a quick look then at what countries this group has targeted. So if we go way back to 2014 and 15, this was where they first came on the radar. There was a report from Kaspersky that did it originally. And what we can see is they were targeting Vietnam, Myanmar, Philippines, Singapore, so everything over in the Far East. However, at that point, most of the tools that were being used by this group were considered to be pretty low tech. So they weren't considered to be advanced, and most of it was fairly easily blocked by kind of tools and endpoint security that was available at that time. So really, as I say, very low level, came around for a little while, then they disappeared until they reappeared for a while. Now, what we've seen when we go back and we track back, then we can see in 2016, rather than disappearing as we thought, they're actually active in Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus. We then saw evidence of a campaign against the Mongolian public sector in 2020, and then later on, a campaign against Australia, Indonesia, and the Philippines. So what's interesting about this group is they actually never went away. What they did was they disappeared. They went under the radar, so we didn't actually see them working. However, once we found them, once we discovered them and traced back, then we could see the history of what had been happening. So what happened was our incident response team was actually engaged by another government in Asia for a completely different, unconnected incident. And while we were looking at that investigation, the team was having a look through the logs, and we had a look. We found a malicious email. The strange thing about this email, though, had been sent from within the network. So from an embassy abroad to the actual one of the state governments in Australia. So once we saw this, and this was how the investigation started, and this would have been actually in 2020 when we started looking into it. So what we found when we went back was we found this threat actor who's been actively targeting governments in APAC. So this group were targeting government entities. They were looking at ministries of foreign affairs, science and technology, government-owned companies, anything to do with the governments of the countries indicated. That's what they were really interested in. Now, one of the tactics actually to avoid detection was to put a command and control server actually within the network. So the computers that have been compromised as part of this ongoing process, one of those was turned into a command and control server, which means the traffic's never actually leaving the attack network. So what that does, it gives you a much lower scope to be able to find them, because you've not got the chat and the noise out there on the internet that companies like Checkpoint can pick up. We can then track down. So that did actually make it quite difficult to track them down for a long time. And this was one of the reasons why they were actually able to kind of stay under the radar for such a long period of time. Now, what we can see here from this slide is we've also seen now the list of targets has grown. So it does include places like India and Turkey. So it's slowly kind of moving westwards across. So who knows? Maybe we'll see more of them at some time pretty soon. So let's have a little look at the infection chain. What this organisation did and how they actually were successful in breaching these networks. So the goal of the infection chain, like anything, is to get some form of remote access or remote control. That's since the days when I used to do penetration testing way before I joined Checkpoint. That was what I wanted to do. I wanted to get some form of control. So the best way to do this is you deliver a backdoor. Now, what we found with this group is there were several ways that they had for delivering a backdoor, but what we've got illustrated here are kind of a sort of three of them that we'll focus on and talk about a little bit. So from our research, we found that the backdoor that was used was called ARIA Body. So this is basically the name of the kind of the remote access Trojan that opens a backdoor that allows them to connect into the network at will. So this is what's used to deliver the payload. Now, to actually get it there, it was that old special technique of phishing or spear phishing, depending on how you want to call it or what tag you want to give it. Now, this is one of the oldest techniques that I can remember. I remember years and years and years ago, a company called RSA were penetrated. And what did they use? Spear phishing attack. Because at the end of the day, people are curious. People want to know about things. If you look at what's in the news and you take what's in the news and you present it to somebody that makes it in a way that makes it look legitimate, then people are going to click on these emails. And this is always the first step in the infection chain. And it was actually brought home to me yesterday because I finished my day's work, a whole bunch of Zoom calls, as we all seem to do these days. And I'd gone downstairs to get myself what I thought was a well-earned coffee, and my phone bleeped. I looked at it and it was a text and it said, would you like to book in for a COVID vaccine tomorrow? And I thought, well, that sounds about as fake as it possibly could be. Why would they be asking me on a Friday if I want to go and have a vaccine on a Saturday? So I nearly ignored it because, I know there's so many of these scams around. But then I kind of looked at it again and gave it a little click and went upstairs and spent some time researching it. And I thought, actually, this looks valid. And I went through and I booked myself an appointment. But the key thing is there's so much kind of junk that comes out. It's so difficult to actually see between the quality of the work done by the attackers and legitimate emails. It did take me quite some time for me to confirm. So I was happy that this was a legitimate message. And then I booked the appointment. But it does show how difficult it is for a typical user within a network to actually know or understand what's malicious and what isn't, because it's very, very hard to do. I had another one recently. Unfortunately, I had one of my dogs passed on, and we were looking to get a puppy. Now, I like really big dogs. I like mastiffs, huge, great dogs. Not many of them around. So while I was looking, I found an advert, and I kind of looked into it and thought, this advert looks a little bit dodgy. And the more I looked at it, the worse this advert looked. But what I found was my head was telling me, no, come on, this is bad. This is a scam. The dog doesn't exist. They're stock pictures on the internet. They're saying they've just been born, but these are clearly summer flowers in the background, so that can't be the case. But even though my head was telling me that, my heart was telling me that no, I want the puppy. I want to go and get this. So I consider myself to be a bit of a hard-nosed person on this, but even I kind of felt that tang. So you can see why attacks like phishing and spear phishing can be quite as effective and successful as they are. But anyway, that's small diversion aside. So focusing on the three infection methods that you can see on the left-hand side there. We just pulled a couple of them because most of them were the others were kind of variations on a theme. So what happened was a document was created. So the India's way.doc that was put on an email that was sent out to various specific people within the government organisations. This was what it was called in this case. It could be anything else, whatever actually makes it attractive to the person you're sending it to. So they get it, entice them to try and open it. So once that email was opened, then what we had was a weaponized exploit in there, which was called Royal Road, which actually was one we'd seen before. The Chinese organization Vicious Panda, which was another APT outfit from slightly earlier in 2020, so at the beginning of 2020, about a year ago now, I think it was. So it was one that we'd seen before. It wasn't necessarily a new one from there. So once we get that and we get that put in, then what that does, it puts intel.wll into the Word startup folder. So once that's in there, then basically every time the person we're attacking launches Word, then this DLL is going to run and it's going to be loaded. So it's not sat there, not loading all the time. But as soon as you run Word, then you're going to see this in there. So you're going to see exactly what it decided to do. Now, some of the other infection chains we can see there, we had like a zip file that was sent out that had legitimate exe and a weaponized DLL loader that came with it as well. There was an exe as well that attached and sideloaded an area body, and then the RTF is the one that we've been talking about here. So either way, what happened was, as soon as it goes in, we connect to the command and control server, then we download the area. We then we do some reconnaissance from there. We have a look at what we've got, what we can see, and then we download our toolkit to do whatever it is we decide we wish to do with this particular user. Now, I mentioned we'd seen Royal Road before, so this was one that we'd seen before. And in this particular case, what it was used with a front end of COVID-19 on the emails. To try and get people interested. Now, this is obviously an extremely powerful message at the moment. For what I've mentioned, we've got things about vaccines. We've got passports as well. The dark web itself is completely saturated with people offering, vaccine certificates and vaccines as well. Although quite how you can buy a Pfizer vaccine that needs to be stored at -70, expect to get that and it works is a little bit beyond me. And I think my general advice would be anything out on the done. And if you're buying it, probably best to leave it alone. But certainly COVID-19 is a very, very powerful medium for delivery, and it's very easy to send this email to get people to pick it up and to actually use it from there. So what we then do is what the loader will do, will communicate with the command and control server. So this is the command and control server that was used in this particular instance. And this basically is owned by the attackers, most of them out there on the internet somewhere. Well, in this occasion as well, we did find command and control servers that were actually coated on people's sites, which is a slightly disturbing thing. So that's how we did it. So that's how it was packed up. That was how the threat was actually sent out there. But what about the infrastructure that exists behind it? Because having a good infrastructure behind what you're trying to achieve here is really, really important when you're putting these attacks together. So when we have a look at the infrastructure, we can see that obviously they've had a cloud project in there because everything was out to Alibaba Cloud. And then the domains themselves were registered with GoDaddy, which is normally pretty benign. I know my wife's virtual gallery is also done with GoDaddy, and I promise you she's not attacking Asian governments, or at least as far as I know. So one of the interesting things here we can see is that if we look on the right-hand side, what we've got in blue are the domains that were being used, and then in gold we've got the IP addresses. So you can see there from the arrows that we've got multiple IP addresses being reused across domains. So this is slightly lazy and is from the attacker. And it's kind of good for us because what it helps us to do is this cross-referencing helps us to build up and confirm the information that we know. So the more things that are repeated and done again and again and again, the easier it is for our researchers to be able to track through. So it gives us a better idea of just how big and how broad the actual threat is. So taking a look to try and better understand how the attackers operated their infrastructure over the years, what we've done is we've taken the malicious domains on the left-hand side. We've got the year across the bottom, and then we've had a look, and we've mapped the ASM, so the autonomous system numbers across there. Now, when we look over on the left-hand side over here, then what we can see is that a couple of domains there that have actually been up since 2016. So they've been up and working for a long period of time, but also as well, if you look further to the right, they're actually still there, available and running at the moment. So some of the infrastructure is new and expanded, but some of the infrastructure there has been there for a long time, which kind of hints just how long they've been potentially active in some of the networks that they're actually in. So if we then move across to 2019, then we can see we've actually concentrated most of the infrastructure has gone down to the autonomous system number 45102, which is actually located on Alibaba. So that's from the previous slide. That's how we can say with some confidence that the infrastructure is cloud-based and the cloud of choice is Alibaba. So one of the more interesting observations we can see in here is the use, as I mentioned previously, I've alluded to, of a hacked government infrastructure that's being used to house one of the backup command and control servers. And the reason we know this is because the IP address of the command and control server we can see actually belonged to the Philippine Department of Science and Technology. So it was actually one of the systems within their network that was acting as a backup command and control. So it is quite a fascinating step, and that's something I've really seen that often. But what was really concerning at the time is we could actually see evidence of the malware that was hard-coded to access this address. So it was out there and it was actually being used. So it wasn't just an accidental thing that somebody had done or somebody had left behind. It was genuinely being used. So, a little bit worrying because at the end of the day, if it's not passing out to the internet, we're never going to see this stuff. So it makes it a lot harder to pin down the threat actor. Okie doke, so we'll just take a couple of minutes now to have a quick look at the tool. So we'll do some a little bit of tool used by this group. So we'll do some analysis in here. So one of the tricks that was used to kind of hide the activity and make it pretty difficult for us to study them was to use an algorithm that randomized when their CNC servers would be available. So if something's available constantly, it's a lot easier to look at it, to figure it out. But if these things are up for a short period of time, they go down again, goes up in another place, goes down again. It's very, very difficult to track it. And this is one of the reasons why they were able to stay hidden for so long from 2015 onwards. So what we can see, what we can actually see here is the algorithm that's being used. So the D&G method on the left-hand side, that's the algorithm that actually works out which command and control server is going to be available at any given time of the day, the day, the year. So whenever it is, the actual malware itself is fully aware of which command and control center to access, but obviously anyone else from the outside wouldn't necessarily know that. So the middle bit here is actually the payload. You can see there, that's the area body, DLL, which we discussed earlier. So this is basically the custom remote access Trojan backdoor that will allow us to actually get in the network from there. So what then happens is, once we do that, then the malware starts to gather data on the victim's machine. So it'll go off, and you can see here it's got a check IP, AmazonAWS.com. So it's going to have a look and try and work out what country it's in, where it's located. It will get the host name, username, domain name, all this reconnaissance kind of stuff that you want to be able to identify the system. Now, what you can do from there is, once you identify the system, is you can decide how useful it is. What do I want to do with it? So we take this basic information. All of that's put out. It's then zipped up. The malware then protects the file with a password, because they wouldn't want just anybody accessing their malware files. And those files are then sent back to the attackers to be looked at. We can then decide what we want to do. So with this particular malware, one of the things that had changed hugely when we looked at the tool was just the amount of functions that it could do. So if you think about it, we've got lots of government institutions across many, many different countries, and all of them would have different things to be able to do. So it's very important to have a really, really good, flexible tool. And this is what they have. So we could create processes, and we can inject ourselves into it. We can delete files, we can find files, create directory, we can gather more information. We can do USB monitor mode, zip directories up. So this is just a few of the functions they have, but it really gives you an insight into the choices that you've got once you've broken in. These are all the different things that you can do. Now, these aren't all of them, many, many more that we can do. We can do keyloggers, we could get screen grabs, so we can do whatever. What this shows is just how much over kind of the last 5 years since we initially saw this organization, just how much better they've got, just how much more professional and how much more dangerous they've got as well. And I think these are the key things. So attribution. So how do we know who it was? So malware tends to be, some of the malware writers tend to be a little bit lazy. If something works, you use it and you go with it. But for us, that's kind of a good thing, because it enables us to be able to look at and build a set of rules to try and identify characteristics that different malware has in common. So what we've got here is a comparison between what Kaspersky found back in 2015 and then what Checkpoint discovered later. So if you see the points marked 1, 2, and 3, they're consistent, they're exactly the same. And what we've then done, and what we've not done, what the group's done, is they've increased then the number of functions that they have. So they've increased their code. So what we're able to do as a Checkpoint is we have a malware DNA engine. So what we can do is we can feed it in. And although some people like to say AI, of course, it's not artificial intelligence, as it doesn't really exist. It uses machine learning then to be able to crunch through all this malware and show us where we get consistencies between other types. And what this helps us to do is to fingerprint it and really track what the different organizations and the different groups have been up to at different points in time. So it's a really, really important use of AI, and one of the key technologies that we have in our battles against these people. So there were some other code similarities that came out as well. So on the left, we've got the area body information gathering, and then we've got the older XS function information gathering on the right. So what we can see here when we look at it is some of the functions are absolutely identical to the old backdoor that Kaspersky found. So in here, we can see the function there on basically how it's looking at the installed software on the machine. So using the tried honest tested thing of if it isn't broke, then don't fix it, we can see what we've done here is it has been reused. So we're able to then be more and more certain that we're dealing with the same actors now as we have been back and previously. The other thing as well that gives us the attribution is a number of the domains are the same. So we saw that on the slide earlier, that there's been a consistency on a couple of the domains running through. So some of them are exactly the same as they were previous back in 2015. So when we take all these things together, that gives us a picture and an image of who they are. So who is Naikon APT? So this is what we found out about them based on all the evidence and everything that we have. And all this is available. If you want to go to the Checkpoint Research website, you could go take a look at it. But given the complexity and the advanced nature of the tools used, we're pretty sure it's a state-sponsored operation. There is overlap in infrastructure with other identified state-sponsored groups as well. The target research we've seen through it is various government entities in APAC, although that's now certainly moving across. And there was a lot of code similarity as well with other APTs within this region. So we'll be able to say this with some measure of confidence. So how do we threat them? Well, what we do with Checkpoint is we get a whole bunch of indicators of compromise, which are what these are. So we can see there if you've got any of these the area body loaders, then you've probably got something of an issue or problem there. And we further identified as well delivery mechanisms, the body payload, the loaders. So if you see any of this stuff kicking around on your system, then you've got something of a serious problem. Or if you can see anyone accessing any of these CNC servers, then potentially, you've got a little bit of a serious problem there. But one of the things you've got to remember, I think, with cybersecurity generally, I think it was in the film Shrek when they said that ogres are like onions, but cyber defense is also like onions. It's got to have layers. And if you haven't got those layers, then you cannot hope to stop. Also, as well, it's okay to have the layers. But one thing we've been banging on at Checkpoint for a long time is you can no longer do detect, because by the time you do a detect and by the time you realize that something's happened, it's too late. It's gone, it's moved on, or it's been cleared away. So by the time we're detecting, it's just too late. We've got to move and we've got to change this parameter we want to prevent. Because when you've got web services that are spinning up for a couple of seconds, then spinning down and disappearing, then prevent just makes no sense anymore. So we've really got to look at this, and we've got to move from a detect mode to a prevent mode, and then you have more chance given whoever your active vendor is. So that's me about done. Hopefully I didn't quite go over, which hopefully should be okay. So thank you very much for your time and for your attention.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much, Derek. There's been no questions that came through. I think I'll just double check. No, there was just a couple of comments, I think, on the tools that you were using. But it's just incredible to see that I can't hear you. Okay, I can hear you again now. That they've gone undetected for so long. When you were showing the infrastructure earlier, like my mind was blown that these were going as far back as 2016 at some stage. How can that? I know,
and this is the thing. It's all about being quiet, and we see it with some of the other, the really big attacks, the DNS problems, the exchange problems with, and obviously SolarWinds as well. It's a lot of things can go on for a long, long time. Low and slow and under the radar, and it can be very difficult. And sometimes you trip on something and find them. But a lot of these organisations are staying out of the way. But if you're in espionage, the last thing you want is for people to find you, which is why we try to do just that.
Absolutely. We've gotten to the end of our time here, so very well timed. Derek, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. It was very interesting. There's some good feedback on the chat here. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. Cheers, everyone. Bye-bye.